Aloha mai kako, you are watching Hawaii Political Reporter.
Aloha and welcome to Hawaii Political Reporter. Thanks for watching. Tonight, part 3 of local boy and sportsman Pat Pacheco on Hawaii government, guns, and the assault rifle ban. But first, part 2 of an extremely important video that you need to watch. The grossly corrupt, unfair, and un-American methods the two monopoly parties use to duopolize their power at the people's expense. How the DemoPublicans have rigged the system against the people.
In yet another of those good government moves, the DemoPublicans established the Commission on Presidential Debates in 1987 to decide who will appear and the rules for participating. Guess who co-chairs this group? It's headed by the former chairman of the Democratic and the former chairman of the Republican National Committees. So you can bet your last nickel that the commission has little interest in bringing new ideas and non-duopoly candidates to the general public. To participate, you had to get 15% of the vote in the previous election, which of course guarantees a role for the Democrat and the Republican candidate. But other candidates were shut out. And incidentally, even getting 15% doesn't guarantee you too much when the DemoPublicans are there, because Ross Perot got 19%, and in 1976 was denied access to the debates, even though he got well over the limit in 1992. Hey, hypocrisy is not the strong point, is not a serious consideration when it comes to political maneuverings. And we can talk a little bit about the United States signing the Copenhagen document of the Helsinki Accords, which talks about political freedoms that require a clear separation between the state and political parties. Yeah, right. And the signatories agree to respect the right of citizens to seek political or public office individually or as a representative political parties without discrimination. Yeah, right. Well, as I mentioned before, hypocrisy is not a serious problem when it comes to politics. And I'll just note, by the way, that in Iran, in the last presidential election, they had some 7 candidates, and of course we're pointing the finger at us for the way we do things. Now, in my book, I discuss in some detail the role of third-party and independent candidates in the 2008 election, and more accurately, their almost unfortunate non-role in that election. And I briefly survey how other developed countries conduct elections. It's sufficient at this point to say that virtually everywhere parties are increasingly become a part of the apparatus of the state through subsidies. However, ballot access laws are typically nowhere near as severe as those here in the so-called land of the free. Now, let me wrap up, because there are people here who've had a lot more experience with this in a hands-on sense that I do, and I think that, you know, they should have time. Like I say, I'm an ivory tower academic. But I'd like to suggest what should be done. First, I'll talk about ideally what I would like to see done. Ideally, we need to dramatically reduce the size and scope of government. We need to sharply reduce its powers and the privileges it hands out. We need to slash government spending and transfer payments. To be honest, in my view, a great deal of what the government does at all levels is simply unconstitutional. A limited government would mean that who actually serves in government doesn't matter very much. And the incentives to restrict participation in elections would also decline markedly. We would benefit by taking some lessons on government from the Swiss. The typical Swiss citizen can't tell you who the president is because it really doesn't matter that much. Now, having advanced my ideal solution, I must admit that it has about the same likelihood of being adopted as the likelihood that I'm struck by a meteorite on the way home from this event. And if we try to repeal the operation of divergence law by having multi-member district, that is an appealing idea, but it's unlikely to happen simply because of the differences between, say, rural districts and urban districts and so on and so forth. And it's also unlikely that we're going to be able to ever return to the privately printed paper ballots. A lot of this has to do with what happened down in Florida. Realistically, what we need to do is to deregulate the election process, get government out of politics. First, repeal all ballot access laws. Modern technology, it seems to me, can cope with many candidates. In the unlikely event that suddenly everyone wants to run for the presidency or public office, we could set reasonable limits for ballot access. Say, you have to get 500 signatures and have a modest filing fee, say $2,500 or so, and have the filing fee refundable if you get, say, 1,000 votes, whatever. Repeal sore loser and anti-fusion laws. 3, repeal all restrictions on campaign finance. All donations would be legal, despite the source of the amount. But I would suggest we require prompt and public disclosure on the internet. Under my scheme, politicians could still be bought, yeah, but we would know at least who was doing the buying. End all party subsidies for the taxpayer. And I think Bill Redpath, in his afterward, has a wonderful idea about initiating instant runoff voting. Instead of picking just one candidate for office, voters would express their preference by ranking candidates 1, 2, 3. If no clear majority at the outset, the person on the bottom's vote would be transferred to other candidates. Now, this would give a great deal of interest in independent candidates because of the fact that the public would be interested in these people. And in addition, another major blessing would be that it would probably reduce greatly negative campaigning. For those of us who live in this area, I've heard more about a 20-year-old master's thesis than I want to even talk about. So those are basically my suggestions. And John has given me a thing saying I have 1 minute. So before, I'm accused of aggression or something, which is against libertarian principles, I'll sit down. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before turning to Teresa, I wanted to mention, single out or recognize 3 of our distinguished guests today. First, as was mentioned, Ralph Nader, who ran as a third-party presidential candidate twice, at least. Ralph's been coming to Cato. I've seen him. This is the second time in just a couple of months. You keep doing that, Ralph. Either you're going to become a libertarian, or we're going to become Naderites. And I don't know which one. Both will happen. And mentioning Bill Redpath, the National Libertarian Party, is here also. Welcome. And finally, Christina Tobin of the Free and Equal Elections Organization. Now, if you live in California and vote in California, you might want to keep the name Christina Tobin in mind as time passes. I should say that doesn't constitute an endorsement of the Cato Institute. It's simply a rogue element at the Cato Institute exercising freedom of speech. I live in a deep fear of violating campaign finance laws somehow. Teresa Amato is the author of Grand Illusion, our next book, and she will be our next speaker, The Myth of Voter Choice in a Two-Party Tyranny. She was the National Presidential Campaign Manager and in-house counsel for Ralph Nader in 2000 and 2004. Ms. Amato graduated from Harvard University and New York University Law School. She founded the Citizen Advocacy Center in suburban Chicago and works with many nonprofit organizations. She has been a fellow also at Harvard's Institute of Politics at the JFK School and a Wasserstein Public Interest Law Fellow at the Harvard Law School. A very fine speaker on this topic, Teresa Amato.
Good afternoon, and thank you, John Samples, and thank you, Cato Institute, for hosting a forum on ballot access and on the important discussion we're hearing today. Thank you, all of you, for coming, because this is quite a turnout to hear about systemic barriers to entry for third parties and independents in the political process. It's not the kind of thing that makes the front page of the major newspapers every day, and it's very nice of you to share in this and for this to be covered. So I'd like to encourage other think tanks and the media to host these kinds of discussions, because this is one of those topics you don't hear quite often enough. And let me say congratulations to Jim Bennett for producing an excellent book. You have a copy here, and I'm going to hold it up again because I read Jim Bennett's book, and first thing I noticed was in the first paragraph or so, he said he took a swipe at lawyers, as you heard here, and I thought, uh-oh. And then later on he makes a crack about Harvard-trained people, and I thought, uh-oh. And then, of course, throughout the book, he kind of poo-poos goo-goos, as he calls them, people who work for good government, and I thought, gee, I spent my whole life doing that. And so when I read Jim's book, I thought, gee, I am Jim Bennett's perfect nightmare. And except for two things. One, I agree with the major premise of his book, and that is that the system is rigged. It's rigged against the two parties, or rather it's rigged in favor of the two parties to keep out challengers and competition from minor parties and independent candidates. And second, unlike most academicians, I have had the experience of being in the arena twice, once for a minor party presidential candidate when Ralph Nader chose to run on the Green Party ticket in 2000, and once as presidential national campaign manager for an independent, and that's when Ralph Nader chose to run again in 2004, despite all of the hullabaloo and outcry against his right to present his views to the American people. And so I really, unlike most people on the planet, because once you've run a national presidential campaign, you will never do it again, if you're sane, have had this experience twice. So I have the battle scars, and I know how difficult it is firsthand in order to be able to present alternative choices, more voices to the American people every 4 years when we host a national presidential election. So I would have probably agreed with 90% of what Jim Bennett said up until the last 5 minutes, and that's where we may diverge in, and I'm sure we do, in solutions. But he has laid out really part of the problem. So I think what I will do instead is tell you some of the firsthand experiences we had. And I'll start in February of 2000. Ralph Nader called me up and he said, well, would you like to run my presidential campaign? And I said, well, Ralph, you know, I was in the middle of Illinois working for a nonprofit, and I said, Ralph, you know, the last campaign I ran was for student council. And he said, that's all right, because this is going to be a very different kind of campaign. This is going to be a citizens campaign. We're going to run with the people, and we're going to put all the issues that are not talked about by the two major parties on the table so that people have a chance to communicate and talk about the things that are routinely shut out from the national debate every time we have an election. And I thought about it, and I thought what he was trying to do, because he had spent 4 decades in Washington and he knew what the score was and how difficult it was for citizens to make concrete change in Washington, D.C. He had seen the government overrun by lobbyists and being marinated in corporate campaign cash, and he had also a personal history of being able to open the process up, and I thought, well, if there were ever a time, this would be the time to do it. So I get to Washington, and, you know, I consider myself fairly well-read. I read the newspapers every day. I majored in government and economics. I went to law school. I thought, how hard can this be? And then reality set in. You know, we all grow up under this myth that anyone can run and be president of the United States, right? This is the national lore. But if you try to be anyone and you're not the party favorite of one of the two major parties, woe to you. It is nearly impossible to run an effective national presidential campaign outside of the two-party system. And that's because we have systemic barriers. Even if you have a supremely qualified candidate, even if you have popular support, we have systemic barriers that have made it difficult to compete, and there is no level playing field. So when Jim Bennett writes in his book, "The System is Rigged and Nobody Cares," I know what of he speaks. Let's start with ballot access. Well, actually, let's start with the regulatory system. If you haven't had the pleasure of reading 11 CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations for Campaign Finance, I suggest you do so. As one person I interviewed at the Federal Election Commission explained to me, it's like asking a lawyer, or rather, I said, well, I'm a lawyer, you know, I'll be able to figure this out. And he said, well, no, it's really like asking a general practitioner, a doctor, to perform brain surgery, and you have to learn all of this while you're doing your other job 24/7. It is extremely difficult to navigate the regulatory curlicues, and even though even the people who work at the Federal Election Commission don't agree on what is in the Federal Election Commission Code, and I'm sure we're going to hear about that from our next speaker. Worse, if you call up for information, you find out the standard pat answer, and it really is a supremely competent and talented information division. It's not their fault. It's just that the regulations aren't written for third parties and independent candidates, and oftentimes they have no idea what the answer is as applied to third parties and independent candidates. So they will say, Ms. Amato, the code is silent. So you have to go and ask for an advisory opinion, and that could take months when you really needed the answer yesterday. That's one problem. The other problem is that people don't agree on what the code says. And of course, the third problem is that really the code is not written for a grassroots kind of campaign. In fact, somebody at the FEC actually told me when I tried to paint a hypothetical that, you know, these laws aren't written for a grassroots campaign. I thought, gee, there's a big problem right there. So it's extraordinarily difficult if you don't come with a cottage industry of lawyers, people who are savvy in how these laws have been applied, and a fundamental background understanding, and really a standing mechanism or vehicle like a major party in order to navigate the regulatory framework. That having been said, I think that needs to be improved. I would not agree to get rid of it, but we'll talk about that in a minute. The major hurdle every third party and independent candidate faces is 51 different ballot access laws. Jim painted some of the picture, but the reality and the nightmare is unbelievable, because every single third party candidate and independent will tell you the majority of their resources, all the blood, sweat, and tears, goes to getting on the ballot, because if you're not on the ballot, you're just not a choice. And this is a system set. These ballot laws, it's very important to note, are written by who? The Democrats and the Republicans who occupy the General Assemblies and those state legislatures in every one of the states. And so even though some of the states are quite reasonable, other states are off the charts, and they make it intentionally difficult, not only on the facial application, but if you actually try to follow through and submit these kind of signatures. Let's just start with the regulatory mechanism. First, and I don't know why we continue to do this, but we have irrationally 13,000 election jurisdictions overseeing our federal elections. And so you have a problem with, you have all these different jurisdictions, the knowledge varies wildly, and even if you call the states, the Secretary of State or the Attorney General's office or the Office of the Board of Elections or whoever, whichever entity is regulating the elections in a particular state, frequently you get something like, they're not going to tell you what their law means. First of all, some of them don't know what their law says. Second, they are embarrassed that their laws on their books are patently unconstitutional and have been held such by the courts, but they can't get their general assemblies to actually change the law so that it comports with what the current legal status is. And so you have to divine all of this. And third, oftentimes they're very afraid that they might be sued, and so they don't want to tell you anything. Now, of course, this is very helpful if you want to run for office. The second reality is that these laws laws, when you aggregate them across the 50 states and the District of Columbia, as an aggregate burden, makes it virtually impossible for individuals who are outside of the two parties to be able to compete, because you spend 2/3 of the campaign just getting to the starting point where the major two parties are. So you spend all your resources doing this, and then of course there's all kinds of side effects in terms of whether or not you are considered, whether you've committed fraud because Jim instead of James signed, and all of those kinds of little barriers that add up into the collective it's very rare that you get a candidate who is even able to put his or her name on all 50 ballots. In addition to that, you have a hostile media confronting you. In the case of Ralph's campaign in 2000, there were 3 or 4 New York Times editorials that basically said that he and Pat Buchanan should not even be in the picture. They were, quote, cluttering the field. Just think about that. Since when is political competition cluttering the field? That is the disdain with which the mainstream media looks upon independents and third-party candidates. It's very difficult to get a story. When you do get a story, it's generally about the horse race. How will you affect the chances of one of the two major parties? Not why is it that you're taking on this incredible burden and you want to talk to the American people and have a dialogue? And what is it that you're proposing? It's very rare to get a substantive story on the issues. It's more how are you going to affect so-and-so's chances? Well,
those are the ones, people. You see those, you get the clues, okay? And the other one I would say is when they're really non-specific. They're smiling, they're nice, but you never get a concrete. They're waffling. These are some clues. What do you think, Pat? Anything you can add on there or disagree with?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you take let's go back
okay.
September, October this year, okay?
Yep.
Now, before the election, all you hear is, I will do this, I will do that. Okay, I. Too many I's.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe the name has an I, alphabet I, so it's I. I don't hear exactly what you said. I don't hear, we will take this and do this for the people. We will support this. We will help the people. No, it's I will do this. And then when later on, they lost the I. Now they have their eye on that great power bill. You see, these politicians, they get money from the rich people, from big business, big corporations. Now, when you give them this, they give that money. Hey, we're not that foolish or ignorant or dumb to know that when you give them something, you got to get something in return. I'm not saying it's out, but it's something that it's going to hurt the people.
How about this, too?
Definitely, it hurts the people.
How about this, too, Pat? Here's what I believe, and it's interesting. I'm talking to you. You probably, I would imagine, you don't have to tell me, but I bet you have Democratic background throughout most of your life, and then Democrats, like most of the Hawaiians here. But it's actually interesting because as I hear you speak, most of what you're speaking about is actually quite libertarian. Now, going to the side just for one moment here, what I'd like to say here and get your feedback on this. To me, what I always see is a government. It's just like Jesus said. Okay. Teach a man give a man a fish, he eats for a day. Teach him to fish, he eats for a lifetime, essentially, right? Okay?
Right.
So what I see, and this is what really gets me, we all want to help people. I think most people have a good heart, okay? But what happens is when you get these governments and they're doing everything and they control everything, the giving, what they do is they make dependents and they make lazy people, okay? Yeah. And they won't let them even go onto the land to hunt, to fish, to do the things. So what I see happening with a lot of these governments is they're not helping at all. They're making it worse. They're trying to make it so they have to be in the middle. And people, you probably know this, a large part of even the better politicians, they set these damn issues up to come back, okay, and they're basically little money-making, projects. They know the issues that are going to divide the people and split the people, and everybody's going to be pouring money into them. They're not even trying to solve the problems. They're trying to these are basically, large money-making enterprises. That's why some of these issues come up, and they don't let them, be passed and resolved. Because as one of the guys, his name's Jerry Doyle, says, and he's absolutely right, the money is in the medicine, not the cure. Okay? They don't want the cure. Okay?
No, of course not.
They don't want us to be self-sufficient. They don't want us to be happy. They don't want us to be doing all well on our own. They want to have their cut in the damn middle of everything.
Yeah. Let me further this to it, and bring it. You see all this grant money, okay?
Yeah.
The grant money comes from the federal government, the United States of America, right? Mm-hmm. Well, this grant money that is given for the people, tell me, I'll tell you this point blank. They are not justifying where the money is going. The government is not following. Are you using the money to take care of this side of the island or this side? No, we just give the money and they take. One example I'll give you now, and the people can hear this. The federal government gives about $2 or $3 million for the state of Hawaii for hunting. Where is that money? We never did get it. They open a hunting class, big deal. But where did the rest of the money go? Nobody knows. My belief is this: audit the state, but it will never happen. Because you know why? Now that the commission is going to be run by the mayor, let me ask you, will this administration audit? I don't think so, because there's too many political influence out there. The same party. Well, they audit. This is the thing. People, the money that is given for the grant, are they following up the government and see the money is going for the people that the money is supposed to be given? No, it's not.
Let's look into two more of those, okay? And I don't know every detail here, but Puna Geothermal, there's supposedly a $6 million they've had in some fund, supposedly kicked from the geothermal. It's gone. It's not there, okay?
Where is it?
Yeah, where is it? I mean, it's another one. Now let's look at another one. This is one Daryl Smith kept bringing up, and I mean, he has a small chance in hell to do this, but how about the Department of Education? Okay, more and more money coming in there, less and less results. What's happening? Where is it going? They will tell you the amount they spend, but they will never show where and how.
Right. This is the part. This is the part our elected officials neglect to do because they don't want to cut nobody's feelings and their own colleagues. The money that is given, it's the people's taxpayers' money that is given for the people. Let it be used for the people, but it's not. It's used for certain people, certain private, high makamaka or whatever organizations.
There's a man called Bastiat, okay, and you may know he wrote a book called The Law. It's in the 1850s. It's in French, and basically what he points out, and I think he's absolutely right, the law is being used for legalized plunder. Okay, and that's what they do, and it's a reverse Robin Hood. People thinking that we're going to rob from the rich and give to the poor, it's really the opposite. The rich are rich enough, okay, to buy the breaks and to get the influence, and what they do is and I'm not saying all, I'm talking to really 1/10, because there are a lot of good people who've worked very hard and made their money, and they certainly deserve it. I'm talking about the dishonest, crooked, 1/10% at the top who are manipulating government. That's the one I'm talking about there, Pat. What's our budget here, Pat? Do you know? I know what it is. Let's see if you know, and what's your thought on it. What's the Hawaii County budget here?
Well, I'll tell you what, I mean, I didn't, right offhand right now, I do not know because the mayor did not come out. And
take a guess. Take a guess last year. Just take a rough guess. How many millions are in play here?
400 million.
Yep, 366 million. So that comes to about $2,000 per citizen here, okay? That's a lot of money to be played with. A lot of money, okay?
Exactly. But this is the part is. This is why Hawaii, wake up, people. I mean, the late Dennis Paval said, all Hawaii, stand up together and wake up. When I was young, I used to listen to Hawaiian music. I really didn't hack it too much, so I was a country western fan all the time, right? But anyway, the entertainers from Hawaii, the Hawaiian entertainers and all that, they were giving the message to the people. But people just will listen to music and not listen to words. You got to listen to words. So the words, the people saw a vision of what's going to happen that is coming to Hawaii. And it's coming. It is here already. It is here. So what are we going to do? Now we have the election over. We have the same administration here. Is this administration going to work for the people, or is this administration going to work for itself? Or are we going to stay in the same boat? My opinion, from what I'm saying, we're in the same boat.
Yeah, brother, I tell you, something to me, it's kind of really simple.
That's my opinion, because the reason I say that, and let me justify why I say I can justify this. That hunting commission that was voted on by the people, like I said, I was there when it first started up. But now, because it comes from the people, I just got a call last week Wednesday from one of the mayor's department big person in the county saying, I'm no longer can be accepted because of this guy who is in the same district with me. My friend, we're in the same district. Lincoln and see that you hear me on these radios. You better know it. You said it in Waimea. The money
power of the country was taken away from the people, but it was given up in the Federal Reserve Act. The Federal Reserve is no more federal than Federal Express.
You try a hide and destroy a freedom. You seek agenda. We know you entitled. American. You come forward American Constitution. 1913, corrupt in the system. Devalue dollar, hyperinflation. The Federal Reserve, controlled by Lucifer.